I have spent a major chunk of my movie nights watching and rewatching Jason Voorhees mercilessly slaughter people, but over time both his kills and characteristics got creative. One day he is this guy in a hockey mask with a machete, and the next he is a cyborg in space. See, Jason's biology has been ever changing, and he has defied it over and over again, because the man just refuses to stay dead. And it is time we look at him as an anatomical disaster, rather than just another slasher villain. Join me today as I discuss 12 physiological facts about Jason Voorhees, which make him one of the most scariest and most durable manhunters of all time. What was wrong with Jason before any of the killings started? Unlike Casey in Scream, I guess we all know who the killer was in Friday the 13th. Yes, Jason's mother, Pamela Voorhees. In fact, Jason did not even show up as the murderer in the first movie, and we were introduced to him mostly through flashback references and in a nightmare sequence at the very end of the movie. Why? Because this movie established the much-needed backstory of who Jason was, and how his condition since childhood contributed to the tragedy around him. Pamela revealed that Jason was a young boy who drowned at Camp Crystal Lake in 1957 due to the neglect of the camp counselors, who were busy doing hanky-panky instead of looking after him. In the next movie, we get a much clearer picture, where Jason was referred to as an urban legend because apparently he managed to survive, and currently resides in the forest near Crystal Lake. He is now furious because of his mother's death and will kill anyone he comes across. And yes, Jason does begin his killing spree in this movie, but it was much later that his childhood story was explored through extended lore. According to expanded lore, Jason Voorhees was born on June 13, 1946 in the Crystal Lake area to his mother Pamela and his father Elias Voorhees. He is known to have suffered from various facial deformities, and some tie-in materials and franchise lore often connect his appearance to hydrocephalus-like traits, which gave him an abnormally large head and developmental difficulties. Pamela raised Jason on her own and kept him isolated from the rest of the world, homeschooling him. Pamela's words were absolute for Jason, who obeyed and respected her with all his heart. However, she had to take Jason along to the summer camp when she got a job there, and the other kids reportedly started bullying him. During his time at the camp, he accidentally drowned after being neglected by the counselors. Did Jason actually drown, or did he survive? I already told you guys that many fans believe that Jason did not actually die on the night he disappeared in Crystal Lake. Thanks to Simon Hawke's novelization of Friday the 13th Part 2, we get one possible explanation about the lore around Jason's supposed drowning. If we go by this novel, then Jason somehow made his way to the shore and managed to live on his own in the woods surrounding the lake. However, he was unable to seek help or find his mother, so he spent years in hiding from society and surviving through hunting and scavenging. Now, this explanation supports how Jason has been portrayed throughout the movies, namely Friday the 13th Part 2, Part 3, and the final chapter. In these films, Jason comes off as a living human being rather than some undead creature. Sure, he possesses inhuman strength and resilience, but he still bleeds and reacts to pain. For instance, in Part 3, Chris buries an axe in the side of his head. It actually causes a severe injury that brings him down. These scenes suggest that Jason, though extremely difficult to kill, is still operating under the laws of human biology. But of course, everyone does not agree with this, and some fans argue that Jason indeed drowned as a child and somehow returned to life before the events of Part 2, establishing him as a supernatural entity right from the beginning. Now, this is where it gets interesting because the films never give one completely clean answer. In fact, the survival explanation seems to fit more naturally with his depiction in the early sequels. However, when Friday the 13th Part 6, Jason Lives was released, it became undeniable that Jason was a supernatural being, because he literally gets resurrected by a lightning strike after being dead and buried. And that marks the beginning of the undead Jason, who would dominate the rest of the franchise. How did Jason's body change between the living and undead phases? Oh boy. In my opinion, this is probably the biggest physiological transformation in the entire franchise, because there is a stark difference between the Jason we see in the early films and the one who dominates the screen after coming back from the dead. So what exactly changed after his resurrection? Well, Pretty much everything. The Jason that we see in the movies between 1981 and 1984 is someone who is ideally human in flesh and blood and can even die. In fact, the final chapter does end with Tommy Jarvis killing Jason with a machete, albeit with a lot of trouble, and he stays dead at least for a while. But once he came back from death, Jason began violating all rules of life and death, and his body no longer functioned like that of a normal human being. This Jason could survive almost everything you throw at him. Gunfire, a house collapsing on him, the FBI blowing him apart, literally anything. And obviously, we get the drift that Jason is now a monster who does not even run after his victims anymore. He now just walks in a slow, menacing pattern and knows his very presence will shake people. And honestly, the visual change is even more dramatic if we compare Jason in the final chapter to his appearance in Friday the 13th Part 7, The New Blood. Remember how the earlier version looked like a grotesquely deformed man covered in wounds and blood? Yeah, that was traded for a walking corpse with rotting flesh. Jason now looked terrifying AF with exposed bones and even some parts of his spine. Somehow, all of this gets even weirder in Jason Goes to Hell, the final Friday, because now the franchise begins suggesting that his essence can live on even without his physical body and transfer itself into other hosts. I'll tell you more about that in some time. What does his mask actually do for him physically? I know, Jason and his hockey mask go hand in hand. And I too am guilty of choosing it as my last moment Halloween costume many times. However, Jason does not hide behind a mask when he scares the shit out of Alice in the first film, and in the second one he chooses a makeshift cover with a burlap sack. In fact, even in the third part he continues to use the sack before acquiring the hockey mask from one of his victims, Shelley Finkelstein. See, when Jason starts out as a killer, he sure could have used his gruesome face as a weapon to intimidate victims. However, he always hid it somehow or the other, which shows that he always knew not to reveal his true appearance, which got him ridiculed in the first place. Even as a killer, Jason carries this sense of insecurity and shame, but the fact that he did not have any proper mask just shows how distanced he was from civilization. So ideally, the hockey mask is something that Jason picked up randomly and realized, oh, it works well. Coming to its functionality, the mask could have served three purposes. One is obviously protection, two is concealment, and three is psychological warfare, because that blank, expressionless surface turned out to be scarier than his deformed face. Over time, the mask became part of who Jason is. By the time we see him in Jason Goes to Hell, the mask has fused partially with his flesh, and it is now no longer just a prop. Rather, it has become a part of his identity and visual physiology. How is Jason still growing taller across the franchise? Yeah, no, Jason is obviously not going through puberty anymore, but for some reason, he keeps looking taller across the franchise. Trust me, I am not making this up. If you look closely enough, you'll notice that Jason from the later films appears much broader and bigger compared to the early ones. Sure, there is a simple real-world explanation, and that is that Jason was played by several different actors throughout the series, many of whom had very different builds. For starters, Steve Dash, who portrayed Jason in Part 2, stood at a height of around 6'3", while Kane Hodder, who stepped into the shoes of Jason in multiple later films, including Jason X, was around 6'4", and by the time Jason appears in Freddy vs. Jason, the latter stands at around 6'5", played by Ken Kersinger. But if we look at the in-universe perspective, this gradual increase in size is actually interesting, because a normal corpse is not supposed to grow after death. Yet, Jason's screen presence becomes larger and more physically intimidating with each passing phase in the franchise. For example, his shoulders broaden and his overall stature appears to increase over time. That raises the question of whether Jason is truly undead in a static sense. And the easiest explanation would be yes, he is undead, but that form is not visually or biologically static. Rather, his body seems to remain active in some unnatural way, allowing him to look more monstrous and physically imposing long after death. And honestly, when Jason X was released, it seemed that the film series had accepted the fact that Jason's body is always changing, be it through supernatural resurrection or technological reconstruction. Jason's body never remains the same for very long. How does Jason track and hunt his prey? Jason seems to have an inbuilt GPS in his mind because you can be hiding at a cabin or running through the woods and Jason will still find you. It's actually strange how he does that, and it raises some very intriguing questions about his physiology. Firstly, despite Jason's huge stature, he has this great ability at stealth and can move around without drawing attention to himself. I mean, think about all those times that people turned around to discover that Jason was suddenly standing right behind them. The second fact is his awareness of the space around him. I am sure you've noticed that Jason appears to have an extraordinary understanding of his surroundings, especially when he is operating from his home ground, aka Camp Crystal Lake, where he moves like a goddamn predator hunting within its own territory, which it knows by heart. My directionless brain cells are crying in a corner. This becomes pretty clear in the early films when Jason constantly uses the woods and campgrounds to ambush from unexpected directions. However, when he is taken out of his zone and put in a completely unknown place, like in Friday the 13th Part 8, Jason takes Manhattan. Jason relies more on relentless pursuit because he cannot use the same territorial familiarity. Talking of relentless pursuit, Jason has indomitable endurance. Most of Jason's victims try to outrun him like any sane person, but they almost always fail. Why? Because they get tired while Jason just walks about calmly. I have literally never seen him stop to catch his breath or slow down because of fatigue. Jason doesn't look like a mindless slasher killer anymore, does he, huh? What is the Necronomicon connection, and is Jason actually a deadite? Jason Voorhees is one such character who has been studied by fans for decades. That led to the birth of several fan theories, but one that still burns fresh in our minds is that Jason might actually be a deadite form from the Evil Dead universe. And this theory has been fueled immensely by the Easter egg in Jason Goes to Hell, the final Friday, where during a scene inside the Voorhees house, we can spot the Necronomicon ex mortis. The camera even lingers on the book long enough for audiences to recognize it, which makes it pretty clear that it is not a random-looking background object. Director Adam Marcus has also said in multiple interviews that the Necronomicon was intentionally placed and stated she, Pamela Voorhees, makes a deal with the devil by reading from the Necronomicon to bring back her son. This is why Jason isn't Jason. He's Jason plus the Evil Dead. And now I can believe that he can go from a little boy that lives in a lake to a full-grown man in a couple of months, to zombie Jason, to never being able to kill this guy. However, the film itself never confirms this outright, and since the rights to Friday the 13th and the Evil Dead were owned by different companies, Marcus claimed, "It's not like I could tell New Line Cinema my plan to include the Evil Dead, because they don't own the Evil Dead." Marcus admitted, "So it had to be an Easter egg, and I did focus on it. There's a whole scene that includes the book, and I hoped people would get it and could figure out that's what I'm up to." So yes, in my opinion, Jason Voorhees is a deadite. He's one of the Evil Dead. So is Jason officially a deadite? Not exactly. The safest way to put it is this: Jason Goes to Hell strongly invites the deadite reading. Adam Marcus has openly supported that interpretation, but the film itself never states it as hard canon. The idea once again found momentum in the crossover comic series Freddy vs. Jason vs. Ash, 2007 through 2008, published by DC's imprint Wildstorm and Dynamite Entertainment. Here too, Pamela tells him to find and bring a very specific book from the house, the Book of the Dead, written in blood on the fleshy pages. You'll find passages that can rid you of Freddy for good and give my little boy a chance to play with other camp kids. Turns out this comic series offers the most detailed exploration of the idea, and by the end of issue 1, Ash too makes an appearance. Honestly, the deadite theory does explain many of Jason's weird abilities, like his repeated resurrections and unnatural strength. So yeah, Jason can very well be read as a demonic force reanimating a dead body, but that reading should be treated as director-backed interpretation and crossover comic lore rather than something the main films plainly confirm. What happens to Jason's body in Jason Goes to Hell, the final Friday, and what does it mean physiologically? Time to tell you more about how Jason's spirit is undying. So when the FBI blasted him and his body parts lay scattered on the ground, Jason should have been dead, but obviously he wasn't. His heart was outside his body, but it was still beating. Even when the coroner, Phil, examined his remains at the morgue, he discovered that Jason's heart was somehow still intact, though it appeared darker and a little weird compared to a typical human heart. And what follows is even weirder. During the autopsy, he becomes almost enchanted by the heart and ends up consuming it, triggering the first possession in the film. From this moment onwards, Jason's soul lives on through a series of different human hosts. But why did Jason change hosts? Because when one body started decaying, Jason's essence moved on to another, like from Phil to Deputy Josh. Frankly, it was one of the most bizarre sequences in the franchise, where Phil Jason transplanted his soul into Josh's body in the shape of a black, snake-like demon form. Under his influence, the person starts behaving strangely and loses their normality, because he is ideally controlling the body. That's exactly why Phil killed the 2 FBI guards and Josh attacked Diana. However, there's another super interesting fact that this movie established. Jason cannot simply return permanently through any random body. Yes, you heard that right. The story indicates that a complete resurrection requires a member of the Voorhees bloodline, which is exactly why Jessica becomes important in the film. This movie thus presents Jason as essentially a transferable entity, whose energy continues even after the physical body is destroyed, and that uses human bodies as temporary vessels. What does Jason X tell us about his biology at the cellular level? Jason X took Jason's body to a whole new level. Yes, a lot of science stuff happened in the futuristic world, but here's the crux that I figured. In Jason X, futuristic nanotechnology reconstructs Jason after his body is heavily damaged, and instead of simply restoring him as he was, the process rebuilds him into a stronger cybernetic version known as Uber Jason. The movie does not give us a clean medical explanation for why the nanites respond to Jason's body in that exact way, so we should not treat every detail here as confirmed science. What we can safely say is that Jason's body is already abnormal before the reconstruction even begins. He is not a normal human patient with a normal biological endpoint. He is an undead organism with unnatural durability, a history of resurrection, and tissue that seems to keep functioning beyond ordinary death. So, when the nanotechnology rebuilds him, it does not simply return him to a normal human state. It creates an amplified version of Jason with greater structural density, more power, and a metallic armored shell. Thus, in Jason X, the new technology ended up creating Uber Jason, a monster who was already supernatural, but now had futuristic machinery added to his nightmare biology. Can Jason actually die, and what would it take? Okay, for this one, we need to split the two versions of Jason very clearly, because whether Jason can be killed depends on which phase of his life we are talking about. So, as we saw in Friday the 13th Part 2, Part 3, and the final chapter, Jason could absolutely be killed, and once again, we have Tommy Jarvis's actions as the ultimate example. Yes, he does not die easily, and keeps on twitching a finger here and there, but in the end, like a human being, Jason breathes what seems to be his last. But once he springs back from the grave in Part 6, his biology becomes incomprehensible by the natural laws. No conventional injury can kill him per se, though some can hold him back momentarily. Now, this is where Jason's relation with water also plays an important role. For instance, in Freddy vs. Jason, Freddy clearly uses his trauma with water when he enters Jason's dream state and recreates the drowning sequence. That means, at least in the dream world, water can be used against him, though in the real world he is not simply scared of it. If you think of Jason Takes Manhattan, he spends a considerable portion of the story on a cruise ship and gets repeatedly knocked into the ocean, but that just halts him temporarily. In fact, at one point, he is even carried through the flooded sewer system of New York, and the film's toxic waste sewer climax visibly affects him in one of the franchise's strangest endings. So what actually works against him? Well, we have seen only a few methods having any real effect on him across the franchise. In Jason Goes to Hell: The Final Friday, a mystical dagger destroys his core essence, and we can see demonic hands dragging his soul underground. This clearly shows that Jason is someone who can be restrained only through supernatural intervention. Then again, in Friday the 13th Part 7, The New Blood, Jason is physically chained underwater into Crystal Lake, which halts him for some time. But killing this otherworldly creature permanently? Nope, that doesn't seem like an option. Is Jason capable of emotion? Yes, he absolutely can, but only when it concerns his mother. The creators established this early on in the series with Friday the 13th Part 2, when we saw Jason keeping a shrine dedicated to his mother, Pamela Voorhees, in his shack. I am not sure whether preserving her severed head should be considered a tribute, but for what it's worth, it does highlight Jason's feelings for his mom. Impersonating Pamela by putting on her sweater and telling him, "Mommy is pleased," does actually help Ginny confuse Jason into seeing his mother's face, and deters him from attacking her for a moment. Throughout the movies, Pamela is seen to be Jason's trigger point, and his behavior changes in those moments. Freddy played with his emotional soft spots nastily once again in Freddy vs. Jason, when he brought Pamela into the dream sequence. Then again, in Friday the 13th, the final chapter, we see Jason getting distracted for a while when a younger looking version of him appears, which was basically Tommy trying to trick him, and he moves towards the young boy almost in a hallucinatory manner, which gives Trish a chance to strike him. That means as long as Jason's childhood or his mother comes up, he does feel some sort of emotion, which also suggests that his memories are not completely gone. How does Jason's body change in the 2009 remake, and is it physiologically more interesting? The 2009 remake of Friday the 13th, directed by Marcus Nispel, depicted Jason more as a living human predator than a supernatural force. Yes, there is no lightning resurrection or demonic possession in this film, and Nispel's Jason was just an extremely large and physically deformed man who was shaped by isolation and survival instincts. Here, Jason works within more biological limits and bleeds when cut or feels pain. Hell, he can even be stopped through physical force. Hey, no offense to those who like this film, but this did not feel like the Jason I grew up with. He also has a very sharp understanding of his environment, and one of the best examples is how he used the underground mine system beneath Crystal Lake. During the film, Whitney is taken and held in this underground tunnel network, and Clay later follows these passages while searching for her. Jason uses these same tunnels to move between areas of the forest and reappear unexpectedly, especially when characters believe they have escaped into safer ground near the cabins or wooded paths. The film also shows that Jason is now more calculated in how he handles victims, and in the final confrontation, Clay and Whitney badly wound him and dump his body into the lake. But the movie does not give us a clean final death. In classic Friday the 13th fashion, Jason bursts back through the dock at the end and grabs Whitney, leaving his survival terrifyingly open. Alright guys, that's all for today. Jason never stops amusing me, and with Peacock and A24's Friday the 13th prequel television series Crystal Lake scheduled to premiere on October 15th, 2026, I can't wait to see greater lore on how Jason became Jason and how they handle his physiological features. Let us know your thoughts about Jason Voorhees in the comments below, and if you liked this video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. I'll see you in the next one. Bye!